Hello and welcome. In language teaching, we spend so much time and energy designing tests and assessments. But what if I told you that the most important part of any assessment, well, it happens long before you even write a single question? Today, we're diving into why purpose is the absolute king of language assessment.
So, let's start with a little riddle. Can a perfectly designed, well-written, totally reliable test actually be a bad test? The answer, surprisingly, is yes, absolutely. And the reason why, which is really the heart of our entire explainer, all comes down to one single thing: its intended purpose.
And this quote from our source material just nails it, doesn't it? A task that's fantastic for giving some informal feedback in class might be completely unfair if you try to use it for a final grade. The context, the why behind the assessment, it really does change everything.
All right, so before we really dig into the why, let's just take a second to clarify what we're even measuring. Because when we assess language, we're not just looking at grammar rules. We're looking at some really complex dynamic abilities.
We can kind of break these down into two big buckets. On one side, you've got productive abilities. This is all about producing language, like giving a speech or writing an essay. But on the other side, you have interactive abilities. And that's the real two-way street of a conversation, where you have to listen, respond, and figure out what people mean, all on the fly. You're going to need very different assessments to capture these very different skills.
So, here's a helpful way to think about it. Let's imagine different assessment types as specialized tools in your teaching toolkit. I mean, you wouldn't use a hammer to saw a piece of wood, right? Well, the exact same logic applies here. You've got to pick the right tool for the job.
Okay, tool number one is the detective. This is your diagnostic assessment, and its job is pretty straightforward. It's all about investigating, finding clues about what a student already knows, and, just as importantly, where they might be struggling.
And look at how all these features just perfectly connect. Because the whole purpose is to find strengths and weaknesses, the assessment has to be low stakes. Students need to feel safe enough to show you what they don't know yet. It happens early. And here's the most crucial part, that detailed feedback is so much more important than any score.
So what does this look like in the real world? Well, it could be a short, friendly interview at the start of the year, just to hear a student's natural speech. Or maybe it's a writing sample where you're not slapping a grade on it, but instead, you're analyzing it for patterns to help you plan your upcoming lessons.
Next up in our toolkit, we have the gardener. This is our formative assessment. And just like a gardener tends to their plants to help them grow, this tool is all about nurturing ongoing learning.
The key word here for formative assessment is continuous. This is not a one-time event. It's something that's woven into your daily teaching. The goal isn't to judge the final product. It's to actively support the learning process while it's happening. It's about tracking progress, not just the final performance. And that really matters, because seeing that progress is what builds student confidence and motivation.
And you're probably already doing this all the time. Think about when you're walking around the classroom, listening in as students work in pairs, and you give them some quick feedback. Or using multiple drafts for a writing assignment. It's dynamic, it's supportive, and it's happening constantly.
Okay, now for a totally different kind of tool, the judge. This is your summative assessment. Its purpose is to make a final judgment call on what's been learned at the very end of a unit or a semester or a whole course.
This is what most people think of when they hear the word test. And unlike the gardener, the purpose here is not growth, it's evaluation. That's exactly why the stakes are high and the format becomes much more formal and standardized. The focus shifts completely from that ongoing feedback to a final score that's meant to summarize achievement.
So yeah, this is your end-of-term oral exam. It's that final essay written under timed conditions. Or it's the big presentation that counts for a huge chunk of the grade. The conditions are controlled very carefully to make sure that evaluation is as fair and reliable as it possibly can be.
And our final tool is the mapper. Think of this as proficiency assessment. This tool isn't really interested in what a student learned in one specific class. Its job is to map a learner's overall language ability against a big external standard, like the CEFR.
These are the big-name standardized tests, like TOEFL or IELTS. They're used for huge, high-stakes decisions like getting into a university or getting a professional certification. And the absolutely critical point here is comparability. The results have to mean the exact same thing whether you took the test in Tokyo or in Toronto.
Okay, so we've seen all the different tools in the toolkit. Now for what is, I think, the most important part of this whole explainer, how choosing one of these purposes sets off a kind of chain reaction that determines literally everything else about your assessment.
You can see exactly how the process builds here. You always, and I mean always, start with step 1, purpose. What information do you need and why do you need it? It's only after you answer that question that you can even begin to design an appropriate task. And only after you have the task can you figure out the right way to score it. If you get this order wrong, the whole assessment can just fall apart.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. Look at how these things are connected. If your purpose is diagnostic, you're being the detective, then you need a rich, open-ended task to see a whole range of skills, and your scoring has to be all about analytic, feedback-focused notes. But if your purpose is summative, you're playing the judge, well, now you need a standardized task and reliable criterion reference scoring to make sure it's fair. Each row here is its own logical system, and it's all driven by that very first column, purpose.
So, what's the big deal? What happens when we really commit to this purpose-first mindset? And maybe more importantly, what are the consequences when we don't?
This is exactly where things can go so wrong. When you use a harsh, summative rubric on a student's first draft, you're not just using the wrong tool. You can absolutely crush their motivation to revise. When you use a quick diagnostic score to make a final grading decision, you're making a huge choice with pretty flimsy data. These are all classic symptoms of an assessment design that has totally lost track of its primary purpose.
So if you take away just one single thing today, let it be this. This is the golden rule. Before you design any assessment, big or small, just stop and ask yourself, what do I really need to know? And why do I need to know it? Start there, and I promise, everything else will fall into place. And that brings us to the end. So I'll just leave you with this one question to think about for your own classroom. The very next time you plan a quiz, or a project, or a test, just stop for a second and ask, are you being a detective, a gardener, a judge, or a mapper? What is the true purpose of your next assessment?